That's great. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Energy Action Scotland's kind of online hustings 2026. A very warm welcome to everyone who's joining us this afternoon for this fuel poverty focused hustings ahead of the Scottish parliamentary elections in May. Thank you to everyone, our contributors this afternoon, our host, and to everyone who's been joining us and is joining us online. Thank you all for taking the time out of what I know are very busy days. I know that many of our members and people who will be joining us this afternoon, or who perhaps cannot join us this afternoon, are working very much at the front line of what is an ongoing energy affordability crisis, helping some people who are very much in the greatest needs, the most difficult of circumstances, really struggling to cope. And it is a fair cliche to say yet again that we appear to be in very interesting times. For many people, I think, out there, interesting would be some kind of relief and respite from what are daily pressures to access anything like an essential amount of heat and power that helps maintain their health and well-being. So whilst recent fuel poverty figures in Scotland showed a decline in fuel poverty from that 1 in 3 that was reported in 2023 to just below 30%. It is something that only fuel price reductions have afforded. And here we are in 2026, and we stand yet again at what could be yet another unwelcome precipice as global conflict shifts commodity prices ever higher, weakening the likelihood of things like price stability, or even, dare we think about it, reductions in our energy bills. Scotland awaits elections, the publication of important policies and strategies, whether that's the Heating Buildings Bill or the refresh that is due of the Scottish Fuel Poverty Strategy, both due in 2026. So against this backdrop, we're going to hear from representatives from across Scotland's established political landscape, and I am really grateful for their time and the contributions that they're going to make this afternoon. I'm sure many of you are grateful that I'm not chairing it this afternoon as well. Me, I am. It's great. Our chairperson is somebody who I'm sure many of you know. He's certainly not a stranger to many of our members, and that's Simon Francis. Simon is here. He's from the End Fuel Poverty Coalition. Simon's been the coordinator of the coalition since 2019. And the coalition itself is made up of 70 charities, campaign groups, trade unions, local authorities, and is also supported by a group of academics. It's a very broad coalition of organisations across the UK, all with a shared vision and a goal for a Britain, a UK without fuel poverty. Now, it's his unenviable task to guide us through this session. He's going to help keep everybody on track through his expert chairing and the questions where he'll be trying to kind of solicit responses in key areas that we believe are important and topical to where we are today. So Simon, over to you.
Great, thank you, Fraser. Thanks for inviting me to chair this discussion. Really delighted to be here, and yeah, to have this opportunity to hear from the parties about their views and priorities for whoever forms the next government. So we'll get going straight away. Just in terms of housekeeping, we've got 3 themes of questions. We're going to look at energy efficiency of buildings. We're going to look at support for households, and we're going to look at capacity challenges that the advice and third sector face at the moment. There's a question for each of those areas and a supplementary as well. I'll give speakers 5 minutes to answer those main questions and 2 for the supplementaries. Obviously, if people can answer in a shorter amount of time, then that would be much appreciated. But I will be relatively rude and interrupt people if they go over the times, just because otherwise we'll all be here until it's dark, and no one wants that. So we'll get going straight away. Perhaps if, as we go through, if the candidates could introduce themselves before their first answer, rather than going around and doing a a round of intros now. So we're going to start off with retrofit and energy efficiency, and obviously across Scotland, improving the energy efficiency of our homes is one of the biggest challenges that we face when it comes to tackling fuel poverty, and progress has been slow to date. There's some growing concerns about poor quality retrofit work. There's falling levels of public trust, and at the same time there's shortages of skilled workers, limited local advice services to help guide households through what can be quite a challenging process, and particular challenges in rural areas where workforce accommodation can add to the challenges that people face. So the question to each of the panelists, and we'll go around in turn, is how would you ensure that we can upgrade more homes and guarantee standards for new buildings so that they're fit for the future and far more energy efficient? We'll start off, I've basically selected the order based on the order in which people turned up to the waiting room. So I'm afraid, Alan, you're first, then Alex, Douglas, Jordan and Patrick. We'll change your starting order as we go through each question. So Alan, do you want to go first on that question?
Okay, thanks, Simon, for the introduction. It's a bit peculiar because I've been coming to Energy Action Scotland events and conferences for like decades. So it's very strange being on sort of this side of the platform. Because I've worked in energy efficiency since the 1990s, including for fuel poverty charities. So do have a little bit of knowledge on this. But I'm here because I'm actually an elected Lib Dem councillor on the City of Edinburgh, on certain number of committees and boards, including policy and sustainability and energy for Edinburgh, as well as the Edinburgh Integrated Joint Board. So lots of interests in terms of alleviating fuel poverty with lots of these different hats on. So obviously, in terms of the question, what would we as Lib Dems do to upgrade home particularly? Again, this is just, it's probably the same for all the other parties, but we are pre-manifesto period at the moment. So a lot of things a lot of things aren't published in terms of what our manifesto is going to be. So what I will be doing is giving a combination of what we've done before, but also what we have made public in terms of what our manifesto will be. So the first thing in terms of this, and the key thing is, we would make homes warmer and cheaper to heat with a new emergency insulation programme and fairer heatings bill, which is something like double the budget we'd have at the moment. So it's really kind of getting to grips with the issue, which is making homes warmer before anything else, and then obviously the heating as well. And this sort of accelerated rolling out of a climate-friendly heating system, including heat pumps and district heating, is something again quite close to my heart on that, because the district heating particularly is something we want to obviously encourage that as much as we can. And it's a shame that the heating buildings bill has been postponed to the next Parliament, because we were very much behind the principles of that. So that's the sort of key thing we would do to upgrade the existing housing stock. And we could go on about what we want to do about a new build, making sure they all meet, previously we said to meet the passive home standard. Again, I imagine that will probably be in our manifesto this time as well. I think we could probably leave it at that. And just in terms of household bill, which you mentioned that, Simon, in your introduction, we have said that we would, at UK level, we would like to halve fuel bills, which is quite a big ask, but breaking that down into realistic goals into each sort of various different things, which I can talk about later. Thanks, Simon.
Great. Thank you very much, Alan. Alex.
Thanks, Simon. So I am the SNP candidate for Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. My name is Alex Kerr. I'm also a councillor in Glasgow too. I've had a bit of background with some of this because previously I worked for Christina McKelvey, the previous SNP MSP for Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse, and she was very involved in tackling fuel poverty in quite a lot of different ways, working closely with Scottish Power to set up their first quick credit voucher scheme, something I was quite involved in, and also the establishment of the Fuel Bank Foundation, which rolled out from Power, if I remember rightly. The Matt Cole is the person who ran that, and he's now the chair of the Scottish Government's Advisory Committee on Fuel Poverty. And there's quite a lot that the Scottish Government already has done, as well as doing more. So, there's particularly in Glasgow, £45 million worth has been invested over the past decade through the Heat and Buildings area-based schemes, and a lot of the benefits, I think, to the way it's done in Glasgow is that most of that is directed towards the more deprived areas in our communities, which I think has much more bang for your buck there, because those are the people that tend to be in extreme energy poverty comparatively to other folk there too. There's another £4 million renewable energy and retrofit that is going towards the Glasgow City Council and state investment as well, in terms of rolling out our solar panel rollout in GCC buildings, alongside the Community Renewable Energy Framework Action, and that's aimed at delivering on sites, buildings that have been leased to the community through our People Make Glasgow Communities Fund. At a Scottish Government level as well, we've just passed the budget at the Scottish Parliament, and I think there's around £330 million additional that's been set aside to install clean heat and energy efficient measures in homes and buildings. So I think that's going to be really helpful going forward. That will affect tens of thousands of people. And between now and 2030, that'll be about 1.3 billion, I think, allocated to heat and buildings. As it's kind of been touched on as well, and it's not, I know that this is the Energy Action Scotland Hustings and focused on energy, but it kind of ties into where we're at globally here, as well, with the cost of oil and the situation in the Middle East at the moment. We are very clear as a party that we think de-escalation and diplomacy is the route out of that situation, because if that is not resolved, the knock-on impact to people's bills, to the cost of energy, to the cost of filling up your car, getting a flight anywhere is quite hard to avoid, and that is something that is entirely reserved at a UK level. But there has to be an off-ramp found there. If we were to avoid a further squeeze on people through their bills.
Great, thanks, Alex. Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. My name's Douglas Lumsden. I'm a Conservative candidate in Aberdeenshire East. Simon, you mentioned something right at the introduction, and that is people don't know who to trust right now. I've got elderly parents. They're looking at things like, how do I improve my insulation and everything else? And of course, they remember getting bombarded by phone calls when there was loft insulation being offered before. And it is actually a big fear for a lot of people, that they don't know if they're looking at heat pumps or any of these things, who can they trust? Who can they go to? Because people are being almost frightened that they're going to be ripped off. So I'm looking in our manifesto as a better way of doing that, to signpost people into more reputable sort of people, whether there's a sort of almost like a corgi system for people that are doing retro work on homes. So that's one thing I'm looking at. In terms of new builds, I think we're in quite a good position just now. I'm lucky enough to have a flat in Edinburgh when I stay in Parliament, and I hardly ever need the heating on, and that just shows you the difference that modern heating building standards can actually make to people. I think there needs to be more of a focus on we've got a huge amount of social homes in Scotland, and I think our social landlords need to be doing a lot more to get these homes up to scratch, because these are probably the people that can least afford money on their heating, that these homes could be dealt with first. I think also we need to have a better look at, if you live in a home just now that is probably going to be hard to I'm thinking like tenement homes, hard to get gas boilers changed into heat pumps. We need to have a different solution for that. I know that the government's been looking at heat networks, it's been looking at that for quite a while. So I think we really do need to up our game and accelerate on those solutions to help people as much as possible. And yeah, I think for me, it is about making it easier for people, letting people know what's out there and who they can trust. So I'll leave it at that for my first answer, Simon.
Great, thanks, Douglas. Jordan.
Yep, thanks, Simon. So Jordan Stocco, I'm the Scottish Labour candidate for Amon Valley in West Lothian, and I come to you from a semi-rural home myself, with a room that never gets heated up, but I've managed to put the space heater on to get us going. So I understand a bit about, having to kind of make some of those choices, but I'm in no way in some of the dire positions that some of our constituents and just fellow Scots that are out there at the moment. And I think the other speakers have probably touched on the fundamental element, and it's probably in the question as well, which is access. I think we probably all agree if we can reduce the demand that households needs to have on consuming energy, that's going to bring down the bills and reduce the price. And that's what I think we have most control over, because the fluctuations that come from the energy market are so widely varying depending on whether somebody's decided to attack Iran. So I think probably, Douglas, you picked on it just there at the back end of your question answer, which is mostly about how do you bring all these things together? We've got lots of great community organisations out there, third sector organisations, whether it's Citizens Advice Bureau, who signpost right, left and centre, all the people that we speak to in our constituency, but there's no clear pathway, it seems to me. When I go in and do a transformation at any of the clients that I work with, it's about having clear and obvious ways to find out where you sit in that pathway, how you get on that pathway, and each of the steps that you should take along that pathway. So that coordination layer, for me, is what is missing. It feels like we're throwing money at the situation. So why can't that money be better focused on helping people get access to what's already there as a fundamental starting point? And my viewpoint there is, if you take a process and you just try and throw more money at the same process, if that process was already inefficient, then you don't expect to get much out the back of it. Now, once that's there, you're then going to increase your demand. Hopefully, that's what we want. More people asking for these retrofits, more people getting able to access them. So therefore, we have to make sure that they are available. And I think that's where we've got to try and open up a variety of energy sources, not just in terms of how you heat your home, but also how you access the energy that you need. And again, I think someone else has brought this up, but I'll jump on top of it as a cooperative candidate as well. And that's community-owned energy. So we see, especially when you get more rural, the power of wind, etc., etc. But community benefit is not necessarily the same as community ownership. So when you start to bring that in, you start to take you're decoupling yourself from the national prices that are going on, and therefore you're now bringing two things in. You've got access, you've retrofitted your home, your demand is less, and the energy is right where you need it to bring it into your own home. So that could be heat networks, for example, which I know we're doing through in the West. So we just need to, there's no single bullet that's going to get through this and say, yep, you can deal with that one thing and suddenly poverty's gone. It needs to be a range of things, but primarily my message is it needs to be coordinated from start to finish for everybody that has to go in that pathway.
Thanks, Jordan. And Patrick.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation to take part. I'm Patrick Harvey. I've been a Green MSP for Glasgow for longer than I care to count now, and I'm the candidate at the top of the Glasgow list again this year. Can I just say up front, I'm sorry that we're a manel and apologise for that. If anybody is organising other hustings in the future, please reach out and let us know that that's happening in advance, and we'll always try and, well, I think most parties would always try and make changes to it to avoid that. So I wasn't aware that was going to happen. The debate on fuel poverty, as well as on the climate impact of the way that we use energy, has always involved reserved, devolved and local powers. And for as long as I can remember, I've been at Energy Action Scotland events and others talking about the balance between the things that we can control here in Scotland and the things that we can't. Household income, energy unit cost, and the amount of energy that we use are the three big factors. In recent years, the Scottish Parliament has begun to have some powers in relation to household incomes. And I'm really pleased that people on high incomes are paying a bit more tax so that we can afford things like the Scottish Child Payment. But those powers are limited. There's almost nothing that we can do on the unit cost in Scotland, but there's always been a much, much bigger role to play in the devolved context on how can we help people to use less energy, to stay warm more efficiently. I don't think anybody predicted, when the Greens first entered Parliament, that the one time the Scottish budget would fall, it would be on the issue of insulation. For a long time now, the Greens have been pushing successive Scottish governments to go further and faster, to be bolder on energy efficiency, on decarbonising our homes as well. Because in the long term, particularly as others have mentioned, the volatility of fossil fuel prices, that's the only way to have an affordable energy system, is to have a zero carbon energy system, one that doesn't rely on fossil fuels. So we've got a long track record of pushing the government out of their comfort zone. Sometimes we've been doing better, and sometimes we've found that more challenging. In the current session that's just coming to an end in the Scottish Parliament, we had a couple of years of opportunity to play a part inside government, and we drove up the number of households that were getting support for both energy efficiency and clean heating, decarbonisation, and that started to reach record numbers. In the last couple of years, since we since that deal broke down between ourselves and the SNP, those numbers have fallen off a cliff, both in terms of the investment in energy efficiency and clean heating. The number of households getting that benefit from Scottish government funded support schemes has gone down dramatically. And there's no need for that. The figure was talked about earlier about a total investment of 1.3 billion. The commitment at the start of this session was for 1.8 billion. And that's why we've got this massive gap between what was promised and what's been delivered. Less money's being spent, and the political will to act has fallen away as well. The Heating Buildings Bill wasn't just delayed until the next session. All of the serious contents in it were stripped out. Now, if the next session of the Scottish Parliament is going to be serious about this issue, both in terms of fuel poverty and carbon emissions from heating, we need to not just bring that bill forward, we need to put the contents of it back and actually have a system that will drive up the number of installations of clean heating systems in a way that the market can respond to. That industries and businesses that are delivering those products and installing them can skill up and scale up at a reasonable pace, instead of pretending that we can leave it all to the 2030s and the numbers will just skyrocket. That won't happen. If we carry on this trajectory, and the UK Climate Change Committee have made this criticism as well, we will fail, because we'll be asking the impossible in 5 or 10 years' time. So those are some issues about the track record the Greens have got in pushing for this issue, but also the real concerns I've got about the direction of travel at the moment.
Great, thanks, Patrick. And so just to follow up then on some of the points that people have made. So I think one of the things that has come up as well is also how obviously this interlinks with work of the Westminster government. So question is, what would your party's strategy be for working with the Westminster government to reduce fuel poverty, and also to sort of perhaps pick up on some of the specific points, what do we need to do to improve the scale and the pace, and how can we improve visibility of some of the schemes that do exist already out there? So we'll change the order. We'll start with Alex, if that's okay.
Yep, absolutely. So in terms of what we're doing in a relationship to the UK government, there's quite a few different things in terms of bringing down bills that has been put on the agenda by the Scottish government, particularly around the social tariff side of things. So the Scottish government has used its convening power. Obviously, the actual powers around energy are reserved, which is where a lot of these problems stem from, particularly around the way the grid is set up. Obviously, people in rural Scotland and lots of different areas face some of the highest connection charges for the electricity across all of Europe, if I remember correctly, and that's just unacceptable. I mean, it's totally outdated. It's something we've raised for quite some time, and it causes a lot of anger in these communities. I mean, I've been up speaking to voters up around the Highlands, SNP members, various different kinds of folk, and it causes, you'll know yourself, especially the folk that are on the front line with us, that it causes a lot of anger when people see these turbines and things going up, and they see the transmission towers going up, and their bills aren't coming down. So I think there's a lot of work being done there, and a lot of that comes down to the United Kingdom grid as well. I think it goes without saying, as an SNP politician, independence, I think, is a huge part of this as well. You can see what has happened with energy in countries like Norway, and with the Powers independence, we could be cutting household bills by over a third. We could be enshrining the right for community ownership, and various things as well. But within the devolved settlement as it currently is, there's quite a lot that we do. I've mentioned previously as well the Scottish fuel poverty sort of steering group that the Scottish government set up, that helps advise them on how to tackle that. And again, to come back to it, at the moment, one of the biggest problems we're going to face.
Can you wrap up?
Yep, absolutely, is around an off ramp to the conflict in Iran at the moment.
Great, thanks, Alex. And sorry, there's only 2 minutes for these follow-up questions. So Douglas, you're next.
Yeah, no, one of the questions I noticed was about visibility of warm works, because obviously I said a lot of people don't need to go to, and I only know part of what warm works do and how they can help people. So if I'm an MSP and I don't really know that everything they can do, then I'm not sure how people in my constituency would actually know. So I think if there's more work to promote what they can do and how they can help, then I think that would be a good thing. The other part of the question was, how can governments work together? I think it's almost a national emergency to actually get fuel bills down. If we look at how governments work together during COVID times to make sure vaccines were rolled out, why can't governments work together to do everything they can to reduce fuel bills? And I've seen comments about we can just break the link between gas and electricity, and that will reduce fuel bills straight away. I don't think it's as simple as that. I think the whole reform of the REMA reforms, I think that needs to be sped up. We need to make sure that happens as quickly as possible, because it's a system that was designed probably about 30, 40 years ago and is now out of date. So for me, it's both governments working together as much as they can to make sure that fuel bills are reduced in any way possible, to as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Douglas. Jordan.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And I'm going to pick on some, again, I'm a consultant, so I go in and work with organisations all the time. And one of the first things that I always have to tell them is you have to be able to ruthlessly prioritise, because they'll want the world. And of course, me and my team can only deliver so much. And I think that's just one of the things before I kind of go to the UK side of things is, are we doing enough with what we've got already? Patrick picked up on it in terms of how much we've committed to and then how much we deliver. We know that there's sometimes underspends in some of the money that we've put towards things. There's clawbacks and all this kind of stuff. So when we've got something that we're going to push for, fuel poverty and poverty in general is something that is that mission, then we need to be able to ruthlessly prioritise on everything that we've set out to achieve, to do, and push it as far as we can. So I think there's probably a bit there that we could be having in ourselves, and then I do believe in decentralising. Okay, so we need to put money where people know how it's going to be used, and that probably comes back to my previous point in terms of community-owned energy. So you think about some of the investments that's come from GB Energy so far. So examples such as the solar farm out in the Isle of Arran, or the wind turbine farms up in Aberdeen, that are then community-owned and start to make it more tangible to how people can lower their bills as they're going forward.
Great, thanks, Jordan. Patrick.
Yeah, just for clarity, the figures I was talking. Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, just for clarity, the figures I was talking about earlier, the 1.8 billion commitment that's been down to 1.3, that's a Scottish government issue there. So the criticism there is directed at Scotland. But some of the same challenges do happen in the UK government. So the GB Energy Local Energy Plan had initially been slated as spending £1 billion a year. And now it's just been released recently, and it looks as though it's going to be £1 billion spread over the whole Parliament. Now, both governments can be criticised, and that's probably always going to be the case whichever party is in power, particularly when times are tight financially. But one of the one of the problems that is really deeper than this, and deeper than any one political party, is that the relationship between the two governments is poor. It's not as toxic now as it was with the previous UK government, which was deliberately undermining devolution, but it remains poor, it remains dysfunctional. And so when the UK government makes a change on the local energy plan like that, or the Scottish government makes a change on the heat and buildings programme, they don't talk to each other, they don't coordinate, and they don't try to figure out how can they actually get the maximum impact from what they can do. And they're, you know, it's one of these problems that's been long standing in the, not just the political relationships, but the functional relationships between the two governments. So not just on this issue, but on many others, there's a huge amount that we need to do to get the governments to actually work together in ways that can achieve more for the people that we all collectively represent. That doesn't mean burying our political differences, but it just means not allowing them to degrade the quality of services. There's another issue that I want to raise about who controls the energy companies. Like, they have to make a commitment to things like energy efficiency as well. But when that's controlled and regulated at UK level, then it's really difficult for Scotland to spend more on that, because that can displace money that's coming in from the private sector. So if Scotland had even a share of control over how the energy companies' money gets spent on these areas, then again, we could get more additionality when we spend money in Scotland.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. And Alan?
So, yeah, I mean, as we've said, nationally, we just need to break this link between the cost of electricity and the price of gas, and then we don't get these fluctuations like we're seeing at the moment, because we don't have that sort of a product that doesn't depend on sort of global prices for fossil fuels. So that is a fundamental thing to stop, to really, that we can do with the sort of UK level. We've also said nationally we'd like to bring in a social tariff as well, so we can protect the most vulnerable and provide targeted energy discounts, for example. And all these things help give a more predictable and constant energy price. Again, we've not really spoken about renewables either. That's something that can be done at a UK level. So what we're also proposing is to move people from the contracts to contracts for difference from the renewable certificates. So again, it's more cost effective for consumers instead of paying much more than we actually need to pay for renewables. I think they're the two main ones. I think we also have other items in terms of making sure that large end suppliers work with community schemes so that they can sell the power to local consumers. Again, that's something that can be done at a UK level. It's not necessarily a cost issue, it's more a will issue. That's probably the main points I would make. Again, when I spoke about halving fuel bills, again, that's made up of some of these things I've spoken about there, which can sort of start cutting down the energy costs. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Alan. Right, so thank you, everyone. Moving on to a theme which we've touched on already, and that's support for households. So, obviously many households are obviously struggling with the cost of energy. Bills remain 60% higher than they were in winter 2020, 2021. And consumer energy debt across Great Britain has now reached a total of £5.5 billion and continues to rise. Right now, we're obviously seeing a further gas and heating oil price crisis start to emerge as a result of our exposure to the fossil fuel markets and the cost of energy. And at the same time, some forms of support have been reduced or lost over time. So the Fuel Insecurity Fund has ended, and while the Warm Home Discount has been extended to more households, its value has fallen in real terms. When it was introduced, the Warm Home Discount was worth around 14% of an average household energy bill. Now it's worth 9% of the average bill. So with further price volatility likely, well, it's happening right now, what do you believe will need to be done by the next Scottish Government to provide more immediate support to households struggling to afford their energy bills, bearing in mind this might be one of the biggest things that comes across your desk as a new government in May? And I think perhaps if people could touch on some of the points that have been raised in the chat, especially how do we help households who might be in park homes, people who've got to use heating for oil, who are off the gas grid, and people in social housing. So 5 minutes each, please, up to on each of those, and we'll start with Douglas, if that's okay.
Well, it's a big question to throw at me there, Simon. There's so much to cover within that. I think when we're looking at support, I think all support needs to be more targeted, and for that, I'm meaning also in terms of retrofit and heat pumps and all those sort of things. For me, I would like to see more targeted support. So actually, people who are actually struggling to pay, then they've got that support. I think we're spending too much just now on support for households who I feel could be paying for that, some of those upgrades themselves. I don't think it's right that we are giving everyone, for example, money on heat pumps. Those who can afford it should actually, I feel, be paying that themselves. So much more targeted support. I think the park homes was a good point that was raised, because that was something I went out to visit some park homes just before the housing bill. I think there could have been much more protections within that. We did obviously get some amendments through to improve the protections for park homeowners, but I think there could have been done, should have been a lot more done. And in terms of the off-grid heating, we've got an energy cap in place for homes that are on grid. I think there should be something for off-grid homes as well. If you live in a rural area, you really are at the mercy of the person providing your heating oil, and if they decide to ramp your price right up, there's very little that can be done about it. So I think there needs to be some more support within that. And if there's anything else I can think of, I'll come back to you later, Simon.
Thanks, Douglas. Jordan.
Yeah, and again, at the risk of repeating ourselves, I think we know where we've got to go in terms of getting what is available out to people, and we've got to ask ourselves if that's been done in the most efficient and effective manner. I keep talking about what I do at work, but this is the kind of the nuts and bolts of what I have to do, and it's about understanding, are the schemes that we're doing, are they modern enough for the way that we're seeing these fluctuations? Are we making sure that the arm's length organisations or distributors are actually, value for money? And could there be savings somewhere that then put that money back into the front line to support those that are most at harm? And I suppose the other thing, and I don't know if we'll come on to this later, but the support that's out there, when I speak to third-party organisations and third sector organisations, charities, they're really struggling when it comes to be able to operate, and yet they're sometimes the best people to support the most vulnerable through their journey, yet they don't know where their funding's coming from, one day to the next. So there's really a massive amount of effort that needs to be put in, I think, to make sure that what we can do for each household, which will be different. I'm on oil heating myself. Actually, I have a great relationship with my oil provider. I can phone them up. They're a local company. They'll speak to me. They'll ask what I can do for my direct debits, etc. So anybody who's in that position, I would urge you to do so. So I don't think everybody's unscrupulous out there. I think there's some really good energy companies out there, and they should be on the journey with us as well to help understand what they're doing. They give me advice on how I can reduce and make sure that I've got things in place that help me just be more efficient with the way that we consume energy. And again, it's just that support to take people away. But I'll pause there unless anybody's got any follow-ups later on.
Patrick.
Thanks. I'm going to split it up a little bit again, as I did with the previous question about the fuel poverty issues and the decarbonisation issues. Long term, we know that the energy system we need to build has to deal with both, but the immediate priorities won't be the same about what's the fastest way to decarbonise versus what's the fastest way to help people who are in immediate fuel poverty. So there is a bit of a tension short term between those priorities, even if in the long term we need to and can do both. I think the support services that are out there could be a lot more coherent and easier to access, and particularly if they were rooted in local communities. If you had much more local trusted voices that can advise and support people and point people in the right direction. So the support services that are there sometimes aren't necessarily as responsive and as easy to access as they could be. On the decarbonisation side, though, I do find it pretty galling, actually, that sometimes the very same people who are saying we shouldn't be funding everybody who can maybe afford it, we shouldn't be giving them grants or loans or subsidies to do decarbonisation. Sometimes these are the same people who also didn't want regulation. Now, there's going to have to be a balance of carrot and stick here, but you can't say no carrot and no stick either. That's just a recipe for inaction. So, as I said earlier, the Heat in Buildings bill does need to come back, and it needs to have a proper balance of incentives, subsidies, and regulation to make sure that that happens. But on the fuel poverty side, and I think for a great many people that does feel much more urgent. As a Green, I'm always going to say, of course, the climate emergency is one of the most urgent issues that our species has ever faced. But if you literally don't know where you're getting the money to pay for your energy bill when it arrives, or you know that that's going to mean it's even harder to feed your family, that's your immediate priority. And on that, there is a lot less that we can do in the short term to reduce people's energy bills. We don't control the unit price, and the energy efficiency work takes time. It's absolutely necessary, but it takes time. So I'm sorry, but if we're going to deal with the fuel poverty aspects in the short term, in the face of another energy price spike, the absolute last thing that we can afford to do is savage the social security budget as those on the political right want to do at the moment. Social security and the work we can do to raise household incomes is absolutely critical. And that will affect people in relation to fuel poverty, food poverty, child poverty, pensioner poverty, however you want to break down the poverty crisis that many people are living in. The social security system is absolutely critical investment for our society. Now, I'm really proud, actually, that Scotland has done more in relation to that than other parts of the UK, and that we paid for that through a more progressive tax system. But this idea seems to be taking hold at the moment, and I think it's a very dangerous idea that somehow social security spending is unsustainable. No, social security spending is a choice. It's only unsustainable if we choose not to tax those with the broadest shoulders in order to pay for it. And with the Conservatives wanting to take £1 billion out of social security over the course of the next Parliament, and Reform wanting to do even more for even bigger tax breaks for high earners, I think we're in a really, really dangerous place. We need to be absolutely full square, resolute to defend the social security system, to defend investment in social security, in raising household incomes, particularly for those who are facing the real fear that another spike in fuel prices is going to cause them. Social security is the most immediate investment in helping them out of that situation. And we're going to, all of us who care about that, we're going to have a fight in our hands in the face of those who are trying to create this false notion that social security is just unsustainable.
Thanks, Patrick. Alan. Sorry, no, Alan. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Yeah, not spoken on this one yet. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, the key three parts of the three-pronged story work reducing fuel poverty are the cost of energy, income, and energy efficiency. So I suppose what we can talk about is what can we do to support households for each one of those three categories. So first thing I haven't mentioned is the social tariff. That directly does reduce fuel costs if we could get that implemented, obviously at a UK level. And obviously we mentioned about reducing fuel bills by half, which would be in a bit more detail. We reckon £200 of that would be from the renewable side of it by getting more stable and less sort of variable fuel costs. In terms of the poverty side of it, obviously that's a whole big do a whole Hustings purely on poverty on itself. So there's no sort of silver bullet that's going to fix everything. But obviously we have looked at a number. We will be offering a number of avenues to help reduce poverty in general, because then people have got more income to spend, and that's obviously going to be I mean, there's a whole host of things I'm not go into in terms of, say, education, training, that sort of thing, to help people obviously help themselves. In terms of the cost of energy efficiency, which is the final thing, again, haven't really spoken much about that, but we have done some research that we think we could get more value out of Home Energy Scotland in terms of money we put in. We think we could actually get much more of an impact out of it when you compare it to the UK level schemes. So we think we could do better there, so get much more bang for our buck, as it were. And I think all those things will help householders individually. I mean, obviously advice is all part of this as well, and somebody who worked for an advice centre obviously know how critical that is to make sure that people know how to use the heating system they've got, because it's all very good, well and good putting in heat pumps, but if people don't know how to use them, then that's not going to help anybody at all. I mean, I've been into properties where people have turned off the heating system, they'd rather use electric panel heaters because they don't understand how the system works and how they can use it efficiently, I suppose. Yeah, thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Alan. Alex.
Yeah, obviously, as the other panelists have mentioned, some of the issues I will repeat myself on because it's very similar issues here. I think in terms of tackling specific fuel poverty in relation to people with their bills, I come back to what I mentioned, I think, at the beginning about projects like the quick credit voucher that was set up with Christina McKelvey and the Scottish Power and Fuel Bank Foundation. And I think there's, in the manifesto for your manifesto, there's a mention about sectoral pressure and the Scottish Government lobbying to ensure that energy companies provide accessible routes for advice organisations to help resolve these issues. And I think there is a part to play there where the Scottish Government has we don't have the specific power over a lot of this stuff, but we do have that convening power, which we've seen with the social tariffs. There is a slight issue that Patrick has touched on, which is the relation between the governments. And I think the change in the Scottish secretary to Douglas Alexander probably hasn't helped that in much, but there are asks that be made by the Scottish Government in terms of the UK Government taking forward that social tariff. The grid needs to get looked at again and how that's connected to it. Cannot be linked to gas. Otherwise, you are just, as has been touched on by other panelists, you're leaving yourself wide open to fluctuations in the energy price. But I think there's a lot of good work in terms of forward looking on this that's done by Warmworks, obviously, and I think there is a huge amount of work that we need to do to get accessibility of these organisations out there for folk, and the Fuel Bank Foundation and the countless others that I've definitely missed there that are at the forefront of tackling this. And that does involve governments working together. But there's two separate strands to this, which, one is, can we get homes more energy efficient? Can we continue the progress that Scotland has seen with the Scottish Government in delivering that transition to renewables while protecting jobs in the oil and gas industry? And then the more direct help that's put forward by organisations like the Fuel Bank Foundation and the other energy companies, who I think the energy companies are open to this stuff, but I think the government has to keep bringing them to the table. And I think there is work for the UK government to look at tightening up the legislation on this, I would say. But the Scottish Government will definitely use everything they have in terms of their convening power to push this forward while we continue to promote renewable energy across the country as well, which is the only way to get away from that reliance on fossil fuel prices.
Thanks, Alex. So we are going to come on to the role of advice organisations and the third sector in a bit more detail next. But I just want to pick up on one point that I think you all, whether studiously or managed to by accident avoid, which is the question about the £5.5 billion of energy debt that is sat on people's bills. We know this is causing people to we could call it self-disconnection, basically not use enough energy because they're in so much energy debt to their supplier. We know we've got stories of people turning to loan sharks. The BBC had a report the other week about people trying to hire electricians to tamper with energy supply into homes, which obviously is not only illegal but also highly dangerous. And really, and I know this is again an issue that crosses both, has an impact on the Scottish government, but also UK government and indeed the energy industry and Ofgem. But rather than just sort of saying you'll bring everyone together to have a chat about it, do you have anything that you would do specifically, or you would advise the energy industry or Ofgem or the UK government to do to tackle this huge growing mountain of energy debt? And we'll go to Jordan first.
Yeah, so I suppose thinking about it, I'll bring it back to the relationship I have with my own energy company. You know, I can phone up, I won't use their name, seeing as you're recording, but a well-known oil company here in West Lothian, and we can have that discussion, and they're open to, you know, speaking to me about what it means for my bills. Now, I'm in a fortunate position that, you know, I don't get myself into that much debt, but there's times where, you know, I'm a bit behind, and we have those conversations. So, I think your point about, you know, the energy companies, the energy industry being able to have a stronger relationship with their customer is a good one, that then tackled in with whatever support is out there from government sources or third sector organisations. It's another input to the pathway that somebody needs to go on to get there. And ultimately, from a business perspective, which again, back to what I do, is that sometimes that's the differentiator between energy companies. It should be within, you know, their portfolio to improve their customer relations, to make sure that that's something that everybody knows about, because that might be why you select one energy company with a pink logo versus another energy company, for example, to come through. So there is definitely a whole, you know, we call it systems thinking, and it needs to be done across everywhere, and not just landed in one spot. But I come back, I spoke about it in my first answer, was how do you get that coordination? That feels like the piece that is possibly missing, where third sector are doing the things for the third sector, and the energy industry are doing the thing for the energy sector, and the government are doing the thing for the government. But who brings that all together and puts a coordination layer across the top? And then, because we're focusing on people at the end of the day, they understand the pathways that they can go through for whether it's they're in debt, whether it's they're not using their heating when they could be, or whether they could be accessing more efficient ways to heat up their homes.
Thanks, Jordan. Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is slightly separate from the question of how people are getting further into energy debt, how to deal with the existing stock of debt. And one of the real frustrations that I've got about the public debate on debt in this country is that people talk about public debt, the debt that the government holds, as though that's a massive risk for the economy. Private debt is much more expensive. And it causes much more both economic and social harm than public debt. So if you want a radical answer to this, I think there would be a case for the government taking ownership of that debt from people. And perhaps there would be a how long's a piece of string kind of argument about how much of that you would choose to write off as an unrecoverable debt, or how much of it you would give people easier terms to repay if they are able to repay it. But that would be a public decision, and holding that as public debt would be better for the economy than having it sitting there as private debt. And on the scale, I just want to mention as well, the scale of that, you talked about, did you say 5.5 billion? That's a big figure when you see it in isolation. That's less than a third of the annual subsidies and tax breaks that the government gives to the fossil fuel industry. And then you think about the other kinds of investment that the government is making into things like carbon capture and storage, which again are just ways of propping up the fossil fuel industry for pipe dream technologies that are probably never going to materialize. So the idea that we actually write off some of that debt, I think would be a far better social use of the government's financial muscle than pouring billion after billion after billion after billion to the fossil fuel industry, the industry that has made its profit by bringing us all to the point of crisis.
Thanks, Patrick. Alan.
Thanks. Yeah. Again, this is another one. Really, this question is a UK-wide matter. It's not for Scotland, because this is a UK-wide debt. So obviously, it's not something that's going to be in our manifesto. I know that Ofgem want to write this off via a £5, an extra £5 on all domestic fuel bills. Now, obviously, at the moment, you think that would be totally unacceptable, but actually, if in the context of our policy of reducing fuel bills by half, which Ken talked about some of that, then an increase in £5 on that would still mean that people are getting a reduced fuel bill. So it'd be very much incorporated in that. So the whole thing does come together. So again, if we can have the change in renewables, more renewables, that's going to reduce the costs. The other thing I didn't mention was more flexible use of electricity as well, which again, it's something that is happening more and more. And again, that doesn't have to be a UK wide level for that to happen. When obviously energy storage and release, that is going to be potentially going to have huge savings for consumers. So couple that a £200 potential saving from that with a £5 increase, then obviously far offset by having that sort of system in place. So it's a huge amount of money, but with something like that, that is the way you could incorporate that, because that is how much we are spending on fuel costs that we really shouldn't be spending.
Thanks, Alan. Alex.
Thanks, Simon. So there's, this is a UK issue. Unlike maybe the Liberal Democrats there, the SNP, we are going to address some of this stuff in our manifesto. It's one of the reasons we believe in independence, because decisions that are made at a UK level are affecting Scotland in a way that we simply cannot mitigate. I'm going to go on to maybe just answer just some of the questions. I mean, I see Robert Leslie's posted in there about the decoupling, and just to touch on, I think Maureen's point about the education as well. You can help people make their homes more fuel efficient, but the education side of things is quite important afterwards. Yeah, that's something I think is really important. In Glasgow, we really focus on making sure that it's community groups as much as possible with our community renewable energy framework to help bring down energy bills at a local level. And we try and do participatory budgeting. It helps fund kind of local organisations to support people as well, in terms of with budgeting and finance and this other kind of stuff too. So I think it is really, really important to try and get as much support as possible to the third sector, because at the end of the day, they are, the delivery vehicle, regardless of which government or council you're looking at, is the third sector and support organisations that actually turn this into reality in the ground 9 times out of 10. So as much funding as we can get to the folk that are on the front line, as much as the governments can do to spotlight the work that's going on, I think is one of the biggest ways to tackle this, I would say.
Thanks, Alex. And lastly on this question, Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I think the first thing is we need to stop that figure rising from, I think it was 4.5 billion. And the way you do that is obviously to bring down people's bills. Now, we were promised £300 a year off energy bills just the last general election, but that hasn't happened. Bills have gone up by about £73 since the last government took over. So, we need to sort of reverse this, and that's back to what I was saying earlier about doing everything we can. It's almost be a national emergency to bring down not just household bills, but industry bills as well, because I think as our industry is getting it's not competitive just now. We're not competing with the rest of the world, so there needs to be something done on energy bills right across the piece. Now, it would be good to say, right, government should just write off that debt. In Scotland, that would probably be about 450 million. So that potentially is less money for public services, less money for third sector support that we actually need. So I think we've got to be a bit cautious on that. I would like to see energy companies working with householders much more to try and reduce that bill, that debt, over a longer period of time.
Thanks, Douglas. So we'll move on now to something that I think people have touched on already, and certainly come up in the comments around sector capacity. And obviously advice and third sector groups, have we heard, play a critical role in helping households navigate energy bills, debt support schemes, but they are of course under severe strain themselves. Demand for help is rising, staff burnout is a real concern, and advice services, for example, often struggle to get through to energy companies' specialist teams to try and resolve cases. And at the same time, obviously, funding pressures mean further cuts are widely expected across the board. So I think, we've also heard about, how can we get support to heat networks, which are very often are rooted in communities. Do we need to look at the funding priorities in the fuel poverty strategy to ensure that the advice and third sector groups are kind of represented in that more? So, but what would you do to help support the advice and third sector organisations, ensure they have the resources they need, that they can plan for the long term? And what pressure would you put on energy companies to improve the support they provide to customers in difficulty? So we'll start with Patrick.
Well, again, there are regulatory changes at UK level that could place better, clearer and more urgent responsibilities on the energy companies. That's out with the current powers of the Scottish government. And, like some others on the panel, I wish that the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish government did have powers in those areas, but we need to acknowledge where we are at the moment. In terms of the provision of support locally, and I mentioned earlier that I think there would be a higher level of trust if a lot of the services here were delivered at a much more grassroots level, with organisations with their roots in local communities that already have a level of trust in providing other support services as well. One of the things that I think we should be exploring is not just how do we have organisations like that get a more generous grant from the government, whether that's local government, national government, UK government, whoever. But we've got an energy system here from which huge profits are still being extracted. Now, if a larger proportion of the energy system was in community hands or in public hands at a local level, that's a source of revenue generation to fund both investment in retrofit programs and those support services. Douglas and I were both on the Community Energy Scotland Hustings panel last week, and again, most of the other parties were represented. And albeit there's always going to be some policy disagreements and some good old-fashioned spats on some of the policy disagreements about what kind of energy system should we run, there was a pretty broad support across the spectrum for a greater level of community of energy. In some parts of the country, that will be community wind projects. In some parts of the country, it'll be solar. In some parts of the country, it's more likely to be heat networks. And again, the country that we can learn the most from on heat networks, Denmark, is 50 years ahead of us. And from day one of that program, when they responded to this oil crisis of the 1970s by starting to shift away from reliance on fossil fuels and started building heat networks on that scale, they said they should be run in the public interest, not on a for-profit basis. There's a huge amount that we could do if we had the political will to say that a larger proportion of the energy system sits in public hands or in community hands. And that in itself is a source of where the revenue can come from to provide all of these additional support services. And that would be much closer to a social model of energy provision than the free market model that we have at the moment.
Thanks, Patrick. Alan.
Thanks. I mean, even this morning we've been having discussions with other organisers, other parties about heat networks and how they can what is the best model for heat networks within Edinburgh. So again, that's a live issue for us, because we want to get heat networks put in, but what is the best model that can be done at a local level? Community ownership would be a great one. Is that viable? That's what we're trying to work our way through. And again, there's not a simple answer to whether there is or not, but actually, that's what we want to see. Heat networks are a fantastic way of making great efficiencies and reducing costs overall, because instead of everybody having to spend capital investment on buying the sort of kit, if you like, to run it, it can be done centrally and those costs can be shared out. And so heat networks make so much sense. And that's been the case for 30 years. Going to seminars in the 1990s on heat networks, and it was the same case then as it is now. It's very cost effective to have a heat network, no matter how it's actually, whatever your sort of source of fuel is for that. So again, that's something we're very keen on doing. And again, what the proposed bill would have heat networks as a central part of that. I just want to touch on something else as well, because another thing that is at a Scottish level would be community benefit. We need to get better community benefit from renewable schemes. So we've been pushing to get more than a £6,000 pounds per megawatt hour, sorry, of community benefit payments for local organisations. And this is the sort of thing then communities can spend that in the way that they choose. Obviously, we'd like it to be energy related, but actually, if they're getting some benefit from having these renewables in their area, then this is a very sensible way of doing it, which doesn't even cost the government anything to do that. It's really a mindset to do that. So we've been campaigning that for years. So that would be one way in which you can get benefit from even new projects in an area to communities to help fund the services like advice they'll need locally.
Thanks, Alan. Alex.
Thanks, Simon. There's I've covered some of this. So I'm just going to maybe delve a little bit deeper at the start on the sort of the date and how you can maybe write off that date as well. So this goes into the question around how would we as the SNP put pressure on the energy companies, and it's a bit of sort of push and pull. But there has in the past we have looked at this again, as I mentioned when I worked as the kind of campaigns coordinator for Christina McKelvey. There was a lot of work done on pressuring Ofgem and getting the big five round the table to talk about using those fines as a way to, there's hundreds of millions of pounds in there very often, to maybe write off that debt or provide targeted support. Now, obviously, you know, there's limited what you can do with that, but that could potentially be an option that works there. And that's an example of how the SNP have put pressure on, worked with, cajoled. You know, I find one of the most efficient ways of getting things done in politics tends to be just politely making yourself as annoying as possible until they give you what you want and let you just to get you to go away. And so that kind of, I think, is as a potential funding route you could go down there. In terms of the community renewables that folk have talked about as well, as I said, the community renewable energy framework, you can see that in the Net Zero Committee. There's been reports on that in Glasgow. That's probably the best of, I think. You can see the public sector acting as an enabler and you know, helping provide the funding, but fundamentally putting the power in the hands of the local community. And you can see that through our area partnership scheme, through the kind of the funding provided at Scottish Government level. Again, I've already mentioned it before, you know, I will continue to stress it. The third sector and organisations in this area are crucial to the delivery of our fuel poverty strategy, of our, you know, socioeconomic strategies, of pretty much everything that is delivered at a government space at this point. And anything we can do to support them, you know, that's something we're committed to as we go forward, because without them, none of this is achievable.
Thanks, Alex. Douglas.
Yes, I mean, we have got an absolutely massive change coming in the next probably 20, 30 years, and that is moving away from gas heating to electrifying our homes. And, you know, we'll probably, I think all the parties here agree that will happen, but maybe disagree on some of the timings of when that will happen. But that is going to need huge amounts of third and sector and advice sector support for people, because people are genuinely lost just now. They don't know whether they should be moving to electric, whether they should be staying with a gas boiler just now, or who to turn to and who to trust. So I think we need to accept that, you know, people need help and that needs to be funded correctly. Now, we've also got companies like you know, transmission companies like SSEN and Scottish Power, who are going to be spending a fortune on electricity grids, but they're also spending that fortune because they're actually looking to make a huge amount of money with us all moving to electric heating in the years to come. So I would like to see those companies actually spending more to advise people better on how they would make that transition from gas to electric. And hopefully there'll be a trusted voices within there, because I do think, and all respect to all the organisations that's on this call just now, I think people are lost just now. I think there is an issue with signposting, who to turn to, who they can trust, and I think we need to make that a lot better. But surely we should be getting the electricity transmission companies that are due to make billions in the years to come to make it easier for people to make that leap.
Thanks, Douglas. And Jordan.
Yes, so I think there's a fundamental point that we're missing here, and this is the third sector in general, but obviously in our conversation here in this space, which is the outcomes that we are attempting to achieve here are not the accountability of the third sector. That accountability lies somewhere else. And the fact is that our third sector step in because they see a gap, they feel passionate about it, they have skills and experience, and they know they can do what they do, yet they tend to beg and borrow for funding in order to allow them to carry on for the next short period. And no other organisation, corporate organisation, would operate like that. They would always be thinking beyond, the short term. But because of that funding model, our third sector organisations who tend to do a better job because they're closer to the ground, they're closer to the people, and that's why they almost take advantage of them. So from that perspective, again, in a wider sense, Scottish Labour has spoken about how we need to do multi-year funding for third sector organisations, so that planning that you spoke about, Simon, is something that can be done much more into the future, helps you understand where your staff are going to be, where your priorities can be. You build that strategy. I come back to the point I made previously. You can start to coordinate with partners, which we know happens all too often. Local authorities are generally as part of that. If they get their multi-year funding at the same time, you can start to see how the plans that are going forward are less fragile and more robust to be able to offer that support, but also for third sector organisations to put in I think we spoke about capacity, to have the correct capacity or to have the capacity they can deal with, and then respond back to those who are accountable for delivering this to say, this is where we won't be able to do it. So either see that we are a much better avenue and a much more value for money avenue to deliver this on your behalf, or the buck then stops back with you, and you don't put all the pressure onto third sector organisations.
Great, thanks everyone. So come to the last question. I think the panelists will be pleased to know. So obviously we've talked a lot, and I think this has come up a little bit already. Some people have sort of touched on this, that we need to look at how a lot of these things are funded, whether that's support for energy efficiency, whether it's support with energy bills, future incentives, tackling debt, support for the third sector. And again, some people have sort of come up with some solutions already. So feel free to sort of elaborate on these in the last answer. But I'd also quite like to get your views on the fact that obviously we're seeing gas prices rising, energy industry profits therefore are expected to increase. And so what is your view on the windfall tax as a way of raising revenue to support households in fuel poverty? Bearing in mind, new polling we released today shows that twice as many people in Scotland support the energy profits levy than oppose it, with support across all party voters and across all regions of the country. So we'll go to Alan first, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks. In short, yeah, we would support a windfall tax. Our sort of deputy leader mentioned this in September. So a windfall tax, but this is on big banks, I think, rather than utilities. I'm not sure if your question was pointing to the energy utilities or not, but a windfall tax on big banks to help fund home loans to install green home loans for renewable energy systems, which would include those solar panels, heat pumps, and insulation. Reckoning something like about £7 billion a year from this by the end of the decade. And I think the advantage of that is the way the Liberal Democrats see it is that it's going to fill a bit of a gap in the market for people between the sort of low income and high income, where there's perhaps not a lot of scope. But obviously there are some loans in Scotland, as we know, but I think this would really supercharge that sort of section of the population that could really, when I worked for an energy advice centre, you could see when new grants or loans came out, the number of people would get in touch was huge, because this is what often people are looking for, to actually incorporate energy efficiency or renewables. So I think this would really help, really sort of like supercharge renewables in the country. And again, if it's UK wide, that would also help. But again, that would be something that we'd be very much in favour of. I mean, we're talking about an energy security bank. And again, that sort of robust system that operates in a clear way, I think would be extremely helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, the polling is related to the energy windfall tax, but yeah, obviously appreciate it. People can make points about funding more broadly. Alex.
Yep. So just on Chris's point around nobody talking about the pressure on health and social care, I think that's obviously a thing that is absolutely crucial. I mean, you get your health outcomes, and I think that's probably implicit, I would say, from most people in kind of the audience we're speaking to. But absolutely, that's a huge impact of fuel poverty there. In terms of the energy levy, I think it's really important in our just transition that we protect the jobs in the North Sea with a view to shifting them over into renewable energy. So in Scotland, we're doing very, very well in terms of our renewable energy capacity. But I think the last thing we need is the same thing happening to the energy workers that has happened in the past in Scotland in terms of our industrial past, particularly through decisions that have been made that are not of Scotland's own doing. And I think that just to come back to that point, I mean, there's two elements to all of this that are very, very difficult to escape from. And you've heard it time and time again here from our panelists. The vast majority of the hard levers that can make a difference here are reserved to the UK government. And I think a year ago, you heard a whole lot of talk about Great British Energy coming along and dumping loads of investment and solving all their problems and lots of jobs. That has largely turned to dust. And there's been, the UK Labour government, and it is the same party as Scottish Labour, despite what they may want to say, has been asked to implement the social tariff and has failed to do so, and has not made any noises about resolving the key inequalities around our energy grid that particularly impact Highland communities and cause that frustration with the renewables project that you see, where people are seeing the turbines going up, they're seeing the transmission lines going south, and their energy bills are going up, and they're going up faster than many other places as well. So we will continue as the Scottish Government to fund things like Wormworks. We'll continue at council levels to get as much money to the communities and the front line as we possibly can, and we'll use our convening power crucially. And we unlike the other parties here, not all of them, will in our manifesto and in our campaigning hold to account the UK parties for failing to tackle the root causes, and that includes again.
Okay, can you wrap up, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It includes again the conflict in Iran, which there is no escaping, has to be resolved as soon as possible.
Thanks, Douglas.
Yeah, as a MSP representing the northeast of Scotland, it'll be no surprise for you to hear that I am dead against the windfall tax, because over the last 2 years there has been no windfall. There's been no real profits to tax, and we often hear the term just transition. Well, up in the northeast of Scotland, there is no just transition. We're seeing 1,000 jobs go every month from the North Sea sector. We're having to import more oil and gas as a result of it. We're supporting jobs in other parts of the world instead of supporting jobs in the northeast of Scotland. And actually, it's worse for the environment as well, because every time we import LNG from Qatar or the USA, that's actually worse for the environment than if we just produced our own gas over here. And all that's doing is leading to more fuel poverty in the northeast of Scotland. So, I think it's what we're doing around the energy profits levy is completely wrong. I think it's completely short-sighted, and we should be focusing on how we reduce people's bills. And we're not going to reduce people's bills by putting our energy security at risk by turning off the taps in this country.
Thanks, Douglas. Jordan.
Yes, I just take a logical approach to what Douglas has said there, in terms of if there's hardly any profits, then there should be no impact to these organisations. And if it is so slim and they manage to get the money back, then it's not going to make any difference for them to operate efficiently. That's just simply economics in business. And I think that's the point to me, is that this is excess. Yes, it wasn't expected. It can turn on a penny when we start to have wars, and it should be, something that organisations weren't expecting to come along. Of course, they take advantage of an opportunity like that. No business wouldn't. But if that is, our energy, it belongs to us, and these companies get the benefit of being able to extract it and make a profit from it. If that becomes excessive, then why shouldn't some of that come into our tax base to allow us to deal with some of the critical issues that we've just spoken about for the last, hour and a half that's going on here? So Simon, I suspect that's why, your poll has gone the way it's gone, because we need to be able to deal with that. Now, in terms of the job losses, absolutely. We've already heard about how we need to accelerate that transition. That can come of two ways. It can come because there's what we'd say in the industry is a burning bridge, i.e. you're being reactive to the fact that we can't do this anymore, or you can have that strategic insight to say, we know where it's going, let's get there first, let's take advantage of it. We always say that necessity is the mother of invention, so that's where that thinking needs to go, and we need to be thinking forward on it. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Jordan. I'll bring Fraser back in to have the last word, but the last but one word, Patrick.
If I had hair, I would be tearing it out after those last few answers. This is genuinely extraordinary to me that we're seeing yet another spike in energy prices, which means yet another spike in profits for an industry that has brought the world to the brink of crisis. And people are thinking now is a good time for a massive tax break for that industry. This is absolutely absurd. And it has been frankly embarrassing to see the SNP and the Conservatives competing with each other for who can be most gung-ho for a tax break for the fossil fuel industry. There is no just transition, that's absolutely right, but that is precisely because far too much of the power and the money in this situation is in the hands of the private sector, people who will only be interested in their own self-interest. This is an industry which spent decades hiding the fact that they were causing climate change, then another couple of decades generating propaganda, pumping out as much propaganda as they did carbon emissions to try and pretend that climate change wasn't happening. Then they shifted to a new strategy, which was climate delay rather than climate denial. Now they're back onto climate denial. They're rebooting the climate denial industry right around the world. And in the face of this, some people are trying to encourage people to see a wind turbine as the villain in the story of our energy transition. We need to be really, really clear. The fossil fuel industry, they are the villains in this story. And they are already putting jobs on the scrap heap. Some of the companies that have already cut huge numbers of jobs in Scotland are massively profitable. They're turning in huge profits, and those profits are about to go up as a result of the energy price spike, and they are still putting their workforce on the economic scrap heap because they've made a calculation that that's in the interest of their bottom line. The power, the abuse of power by the private sector in this energy system is the root of the reason why we are not seeing a just transition. And what we need in response is for governments to have the nerve to govern and to, if I can borrow a phrase from the political right, for governments to take back control from the ruthless exploiters in the private sector who've caused this crisis.
Thank you, Patrick. And well, glad we didn't start with that question, else we may have had a bit more of a heated debate throughout what was an incredibly interesting and very insightful conversation that we've had throughout this afternoon. So thank you from me for being here and taking the time to answer all the questions, and appreciate there's quite a lot of detail. We've got into some complexities around fuel poverty, so really useful to hear everyone's insights. So thank you very much. Fraser.
Oh, thank you, Simon. And thank you, everyone, this afternoon. You're right. If only you could generate real heat from political discourse, people would really be reassured at this point in time. But unfortunately, I know that we cannot do that. In some ways, kind of reflections on just this afternoon, it's obviously reassuring for me that there is still agreement a cross-party agreement on the depth of the issue that society faces and the nature of the solutions, not necessarily the absolute route to the answer in every case, but that there is still that unanimity on the issue itself. I look back to the passing of the Fuel Poverty Act in 2019, and it is one of those rare things that went through the Scottish Parliament with unanimous agreement. It has got some tough targets in there, 15% by 2030, 5% by 2040. And we sit today at somewhere in the region of probably 30%. It's a long way to go. It was good to hear things on fairer pricing and affordability and some consensus that that is absolutely the goal. But we are probably a long way from there. And some of the support that's necessary needing to be more progressive. I think one of the things that maybe colleagues in the chat were maybe reflecting on is that we know that fuel poverty has broader and wider costs to society in terms of the impact that it might have on health and social care, where stress, mental health decline, people with physical vulnerabilities are at risk when they're unable to heat their homes to an adequate level. In fact, I think, interestingly, we drew on a couple of international examples there. He spoke about Denmark's experience in heat networks. I think a couple of years ago, we featured in one of our online seminars exactly that, the story of Denmark's not-for-profit heat network system, which was pre-regulation for us here in GB. And when you look at something like excess winter mortality, which we often point to as a measure of how difficult life becomes for people, and how really impactful it is when you get to that point where people's lives are lost in the winter months because their homes are not warm enough. You look at a country like Sweden, where there is no material difference between winter and summer. There is no phenomena of excess winter mortality. Something that Jerry McCartney from Glasgow University pointed out at our conference back in November. But I know my colleagues on the call who've been on the call this afternoon come from a very broad range of backgrounds. We've got some people from the NHS, housing associations, energy suppliers, retrofit, specialist advice charities. I think many of them would share our own views on things like income support is going to be needed for people who need it most. We will need crisis support ready to meet any challenge that comes. It would be fantastic to see fuel poverty being reflected across government policy areas, whether that's climate or health and social security. It was interesting to hear discussions on a social tariff, something that I know our members are very supportive of. And the lack of progress on that is almost unbelievable in a place where both the energy industry and charities alike agree that it is the best solution to support those who need help the most. Retrofit, absolutely essential. The cheapest energy is, of course, the energy that you do not need to use to maintain your health and well-being, but it will require investment in skills and in jobs to make sure that we can retrofit at scale and at pace. And I know that some of that has been touched on in the chat about just how difficult it can be at times to mobilise that level of investment and that level of change that's so required. We've touched on debt. It's a huge issue, and it's simply not going away. And it can only get worse if energy prices increase even more. And the advice sector stands as ever, third sector advice sector in particular, stands as ever at a front line that is getting ever wider and ever bigger. The challenges are simply not reducing, and yet the tools in the toolbox that many I know used to have, they feel as if many of them have simply been taken away, and they're just helping people get by every day when they want to move to a transformative place to help people simply change their lives entirely for the better. But it's been a fantastic afternoon. I thank you so much. I'd like to thank Alan, Alex, Douglas, Jordan and Patrick for this afternoon and your contributions on behalf of your parties ahead of the Scottish parliamentary elections, which are just round the corner. You guys will be working even harder, I'm sure, over the coming weeks. And of course, I'd like to thank Simon, who has so ably chaired this afternoon. And yeah, thanks for bringing that final question. But certainly enlivened the last few moments on this. So For everyone out there, we're going to stop recording shortly, but it will be made available so that people who were unable to join us this afternoon for, as I said at the beginning, a lot of people out there on that front line right now, and I know there is an awful lot of public concern about the direction that energy prices are taking. Let's hope they don't go in that direction. I'm all for that. Anything that reduces pressure on households in Scotland would be welcome. Anything that helps to reduce fuel poverty is absolutely welcome. But we need to do so much more. We need to galvanise so much more. But thank you all for your contributions this afternoon, and take care.
Thank you, Fraser.
Thanks very much.